So I'm going to be doing collagen and bone, soft tissues, extracellular matrix as one of our seminars a little further on. So I don't want to do too much on bone density today, but it is an issue, and we've already touched upon the fact that the better the bone density you get when you're younger, the more reserve you've got when you're older, when you start to lose the bone. And you'll notice that in this particular case, the lady, because it's more of a woman's problem than a man, although men do lose bone density as well, but they're becoming stooped. And as they become stooped, they become more kyphotic. And with the kyphosis, the head goes down, and then eventually they have problems getting the head up. So they end up with a kyphotic, lordotic kyphotic neck and things, and then eventually the head drops down and stays down. So you find it's like that. With women, it tends to create this kyphosis. With men, it's different. Men seem to shrink into their trousers, shrink vertically, as if they've been compressed. So what happens is the trousers go up. If you notice, their trousers are up to here. And I used to always wonder as a small boy why they had short ties. Because they always had a tie about that long. And then trousers up to here, and big braces to hold the trousers up. But I didn't realise this because they'd shrunk and lost 3 or 4 inches or more than that. And then they gradually get lost. But most of that shrinkage in people is fairly natural the older you get, is disc space. 1/5 of the height of the spine is disc space. So it's natural for the nucleus pulposus to dry out as we age. So we're going to lose height, and that's not bone density. It can be just disc space. So it may not all be bone when we lose it. And remember, the first signs that you might see are in the mouth, which is yesterday in the last seminar you looked at the teeth and looking for the exposure of the roots of the teeth may indicate the first sign of bone density is when you lose those the gum tissue and the shrinkage of the bone there. So it's something a dentist can pick out long before, may tell you, you're losing a little bit of your gums, beginning to get the root showing through. This could indicate you're getting a bit of bone loss, bone density. So only 1 out of every 2 people over the age of 70, 1 out of every 2, will suffer from a bone fracture as a result of osteoporosis, with 1 in 5 diagnoses being men. So men have less of this than females. So 1 out of every 2 people over 70. So you've gone through life very lucky if you don't break a bone at some stage, but 1 out of 2 over 70. Simple steps towards starting young, as I said, would put all these percentages closer to 0. Women over 50 are more likely to get osteoporosis than breast cancer, heart disease and ovarian cancer combined. So it's a huge problem, huge. It's a lifetime of work really to make sure that the woman when she's younger has a proper bone density. In the case of hip fractures, 1/3 die of complications, which is hard to visualize, isn't it? That a fractured hip can be a fatal, but the older the person is, you hear of the person having an accident, breaking the hip, and then dying, usually of a thrombosis. And they usually die within a year. For another 1/3, the rate of death remains higher than otherwise expected for years after the fracture, even in patients who seem to make a full recovery. Almost all of these cases could have been prevented. So, see that nice fracture across there. Osteoporosis means porous, so bones with holes in, so brittle that they can fracture from the force than nothing more than a sneeze. Osteomalacia means softening of the bones, and osteopenia means low bone mass. So so you start with lower bone mass and end up eventually with osteoporosis. So osteoporosis is primarily the scaffolding within the bone, the trabeculae as it's called, not being correct. Okay, and on that trabeculae or scaffolding, you put the planks, which is the minerals. So the thing that makes the scaffolding safe, the planks, are calcium, magnesium, other minerals, boron, etc., even strontium. So there's a whole host of different minerals that go into bone. But it's no good putting the planks if you've got no scaffolding. Okay, so relatively few people are deficient in calcium and magnesium, but there are some, as we know. But a lot of people, as we get older, are deficient in collagen. It does seem that bone density and the putting on of bone cells and the scaffolding is being mediated by certain hormones. Again, we'll talk about these next module. But the main ones are the anabolic steroid hormones, not the catabolic steroid hormones. So the catabolic ones are cortisol and cortisone-like substances. These break protein down to make sugar, gluconeogenesis. But the anabolic ones are the ones that attach to the receptors of the bone tissue, in this case, of the nucleus, they're nuclear receptors, which switch the mechanism on to make more collagen and other proteins like osteocalcin in the bone. So fundamentally, it's a collagen problem, and fundamentally it's due to a deficiency, or maybe due to a deficiency, of an anabolic steroid. And as we'll see next module, DHEA, testosterone, and more importantly is dihydrotestosterone are the major androgens or anabolic steroids. Okay, so these are the ones that put, develop. So it all depends upon the receptor sites. So certain tissues have receptor sites for androgens, for these three hormones, and other tissues don't. Probably all have some degree, but bone has androgen receptors, and it's mostly the dihydrotestosterone that attaches. So remember, when you muscle test with dihydrotestosterone to see if it strengthens. And in fact, I would say in a woman, if it does strengthen, there's a fair chance that she's actually got osteoporosis. Now we have another nifty little diagnosis, which is a tuning fork. So vibration is not transmitted very well in osteoporotic tissue. This was first discovered with fractures. If I were to go back to the picture of the fracture, if I was to put a tuning fork here and listen on the bone, say the anterior superior spine with a stethoscope, and put a tuning fork here on the acetabulum, you'd hear the tuning fork ringing. If you put it there, the tuning fork, you'd hit the tuning fork, put it on there, you'd hear nothing. Okay? Even if I put the stethoscope there, because there's a fracture. They discovered this in India, and they were 100% right when they then sent the patients off for x-ray that there was a fracture. And you can do that yourself as well. But I learned you don't have to listen even with a stethoscope, you just muscle test. So you do the tuning fork distal to the fracture, where you suspect a fracture. It might be in the foot, might be anywhere else. Hit the tuning fork, put the tuning fork onto the bony prominence distal on that bone, and then muscle test. And if they go weak, there's a good chance they've got a fracture in there, or it's osteoporotic. So it could be a specific vertebra. Most of the osteoporosis is in the vertebra, particularly in the thoracic spine, lumbar spine, and around the hips and the acetabulum, which is why these fractures occur much more readily, because we lost bone density in the hips. So here we've got normal bone. So basically bone consists of fibers of collagen, which give the elasticity, and calcium, which gives the hardness. Okay. Osteoporotic bone is mainly thinning, is due to a loss of collagen, which takes calcium out with it. Both hard and spongy bone tissues, soft tissues, are affected. So you can see we lost the calcium there, and the trabeculae in the middle. Bone contains both organic and inorganic material. The principal proteins of bone are collagen 1 and 5, and other non-collagen proteins, which are osteocalcin and a few other ones. So collagen type 1 is the major protein, comprising 90 to 95% of organic material. So collagen is a protein, and it's thousands of amino acids long. It's the most abundant protein in the human body. And think of collagen as a glue that holds us together. So the thing that holds our muscles, our soft tissues, our skin, and our bones, even our bones together, is collagen. It's like the scaffolding supports the tissues entirely there. So it's made of primarily 3 amino acids: glycine, something, something, glycine, something, something, glycine, something, something. So every third one is glycine for anything up to 1,000. So the codon, or the code, would be the code of the amino acids making up the codon for glycine, something, another amino acid, something, glycine, etc., 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 on and on and on. That something, something is lysine or proline, or the hydroxylated forms of these. So it could be hydroxyproline, hydroxylysine. Okay, so it's glycine, and then we've got proline or lysine, or hydroxyproline or hydroxylysine. And that hydroxylation, the conversion of proline and lysine into the hydroxylated one, is dependent upon vitamin C. So that's where vitamin C comes in as far as the structure. Linus Pauling discovered this in late 60s, I think it was, that the role of vitamin C in collagen. Okay? So he was the first person to diagnose the structure of collagen and how it's made into a spiral with 3 rings, which we'll see the exact structure of it later on in the soft tissue module. In fact, he was convinced that that's what DNA was going to be, a triple helix. So he actually worked in the team before Crick and Watson discovered it, and he was very close. Had he stayed with the team with them, he probably would have got the award for it as well. He was convinced it was a triple helix, and it proved with crystal photography to be a double helix. So collagen 1, now there's different types of collagen. Collagen 5 is really a very, very small amount variation. Each collagen type is a variation on that theme. The only difference is it's still glycine, something, something, glycine, but that something, something is a little different sequence in collagen type 2, collagen type 3, and so on. So certain tissues in the body have more of one type of collagen. So collagen 1 is in bone. The beautiful thing for us is that collagen, all the 5 collagens are present really in the skin. So it's very simple. All we've got to do is tug the skin. So Jane, you're nearest now. Right, if you sit yourself on here. So what we're going to do, Gary, if you put Jane on the screen. So just push the elbow here above your head, so we do the middle fibers of the deltoid. Now with this, I want you just to tug the skin on the back of the hand. See what she's doing there? Can you see that on the screen all right? Okay, and now let it go. Push. Okay, so when we tug the skin, that's collagen. And it can be skin anywhere that you want. You know, any bit where you want to stretch, you tug it, you muscle test. We then do what we call the twang test. In other words, we let it go, a muscle test. And when you let it go, that's the elastin. So that's the recoil. That's another part of the extracellular matrix. It's a different substance from collagen. Collagen isn't elastic, it's the thing that holds us together. So it's got a little give in it, but it's not elastic like elastin. So remember in the last module we talked about the sphincters being elastin. In other words, things went through them and then they recoiled back like an elastic band. Thank you. So why don't we just try that on each other? Now we've done the collagen test. What we found is that collagen is in all the different types of collagen is in the skin. So by giving the skin tug test, that'll tell us about collagen. It won't tell us about bone, but it will tell us that there's a collagen problem. Okay. So there are other proteins in the bone apart from collagen, which would be osteocalcin and other problems, bone proteins that we'll talk about in the module on bone density. So the inorganic mineral component is mainly hydroxyapatite, along with sodium, magnesium, carbonate, and fluoro. So we talked about fluorine yesterday, our last module. So in teeth, so it would be fluoroapatite is the form of way fluoride works on the enamel in the teeth. So it's called fluoroapatite. This is something which is totally insoluble. Otherwise our bones would just melt every time they were in the presence of liquid in our teeth. So this is a real solid, hard type of calcium. Approximately 99% of the body's calcium as we said, is contained in the bone. So it's a massive depot of bone, and this is the problem, that if you take a lot of vitamin D and it converts into the 125 type of D that we spoke about in the vitamin module, module 2, and not into the 24-25 to keep the ratio, you'll increase your vitamin D, which will increase the calcium. It will tell your body you need more calcium. So if you can't get it from the food, from the gut, if you're not eating it, and you shut your kidney expulsion down so you don't wee any calcium out in the urine, you'll take it from the bone. And so high doses of D when you don't need it, and particularly if you shunt it towards the 125, you'll actually lose bone density. So D is a two-edged sword, if you like. You don't want to take too much D. On the other hand, you need D if you haven't got it. Okay? So people say, well, I should take D all the time. Low dose is probably all right, but I wouldn't take very high dose over times when you don't need it. In the winter, obviously, we need more than in the summer. That's very, very important to have enough because it stimulates the immune system. But as far as bone density is concerned, you don't want to be drawing calcium out of your bones. I find a lot of people who have this issue have high levels of the 125 and low levels of the 24-25, which to keep the balance there. And they've got high calcium, they're weakened to calcium, and they're starting to deposit it. And they deposit in their joints, first of all. So it usually causes little swellings, little lumps in the fingers and things like that, like little cysts that form in there. It may be cysts in other locations as well. It hardens your arteries up. So the arteries get calcium deposited in there. You get bursitis. Just creaking joints is basically, little calcified deposits, and they can cause a lot of irritation and sudden blow-ups of synovitis and so on. So don't take vitamin D if you don't need it, but if you do need it, then you definitely take it and take the right one. So hydroxyapatite confers on bone the strength and resilience required. The dynamic structure of bone undergoes continuing remodeling, consisting of reabsorption of replacement of new bone. So it's constantly changing bone. It's not a fixed commodity. And the bone you had a few years ago is not probably the same bone that you have now. We used to think it was about a 7-year cycle when the bones go. And remember, as I said, some tissues change over much quicker. Like in the mouth, the gums can regenerate as quickly as 20 minutes. So stomachs can be every couple of hours and so on. So we can regenerate at different rates. Bone was considered to be about every 7 years, but now it may actually be a lot quicker than that. But definitely, you're not the same person as came to the last module in September or in December and November, but some of you is. Some parts of you, your bones. But in 7 years' time, you will be a different person altogether. So you can change, and this is the thing, that you will change completely in about so many years. But it's not a sudden on your 7th, 14th birthday. It's a process where different tissues regenerate at different models. So bone is constantly remodeling, which permits bone to adapt to both physical increases in weight bearing and hormonal signals. The major types of cells that do this are the osteoblasts, which are involved with the deposition of bone. I always think osteoblasts ought to be involved with the reabsorption, the getting rid of it, but that's the osteoclasts. So the osteoblasts are the ones that lay it down. Osteoclasts are multinucleated cells derived from hemopoietic stem cells. These are, of course, in bone marrow. Osteoclasts possess an atypical membrane. Well, it's not going to worry about it. We won't get into detail here. So, so here's some of the other proteins. Osteocalcin, as we see here, osteopontin, osteonectin. These are relatively small proteins, but principally it's collagen 1 and collagen 5, which is a smaller version. 90% of protein is collagen now. So a functional test, we used to have a product you can still get for your garden called bone meal, which is literally just ground bone, usually a cow's, bovine origin. I use it for testing purposes for bones density, if a person strengthens the bone density, but don't give it. You know, it used to be available as a health food supplement. You'd have ground bone meal, you know, help build up your bones. Whether it ever did or not, because it's mostly hydroxyapatite and it's insoluble virtually. But the idea of finely grinding it, they said will get in, but I don't know. Might have, might not, who knows. But it's good from a functional point of view. So if a person strengthens to bone meal, then you can say that they probably need some component of the bone. And then you look down your list, which we'll give you later on, of all the minerals that are in bone, and then you see which one it is. So strong muscle weakens query to phosphorus, because if phosphorus is high, it tends to flush out calcium and other minerals from the bone. So the final few topics here, we're going to start with the menopause. So we're going to, in the next module, be looking at hormones. So obviously the female hormones, the steroids, will be a big part of it. But the menopause basically is something that can considered to occur when the lady no longer ovulates. So it's the ovulation process which occurs at whatever age it does occur or stops occurring, and with the ovulation that produces progesterone, and when the progesterone level stops, and then they call that the menopause. So a large part of the symptoms is due to low progesterone. Now we also know that the progesterone is produced on a regular basis right there through from the adrenal cortex, not just from the egg, from the ovary. So the level of progesterone increases in the second half of the cycle, but in the first part of the cycle, you also have progesterone, but of a much lower level, and so do men. Now we don't have as much progesterone, and progesterone is the one that regulates the elastin. So elastin is regulated by progesterone. This is why girls generally are more flexible than boys. And this is why at menopausal time, postmenopausal, women say, I'm stiff, I haven't got the elasticity that they used to have because the progesterone level has dropped down. But it's normal, like in the first part of the cycle, to have a lower level of progesterone. Anyway, so after the menopause, nothing really should be different apart from the fact you don't get the higher period in the luteal phase as opposed to the follicular first 14 days of the cycle. So fundamentally, women who have low adrenal function don't produce as much progesterone in the rest of the 28 days in the cycle that they should do. So fundamentally, therefore, a menopause will be a difficult time for someone who's got low adrenal function. So generally, the menopause is an adrenal problem and not just an ovarian problem. It's normal. Up until the second part again of the 1800s, it wasn't even mentioned. It wasn't, you know, it was just occurred, you know. And after that, and particularly into the 1900s, it started becoming an issue with certain symptoms. So it was something which is more environmental, occurred, possibly because people started to develop deficiencies because of intensive farming and so on. So the main things to consider would be our friends zinc and magnesium. And by far the most common thing again is pyridoxal 5-phosphate. So P5P tends to be involved. What causes the symptoms and the flushing is difficult, whether it's the breakdown products of estrogens, we used to think it was. What I definitely find the marker in all cases of menopausal, particularly with hot flushes and things, is high prolactin. So prolactin is a pituitary hormone, which is a releasing hormone which targets obviously the mammary glands to stimulate lactation. But it also targets the ovaries and other tissues in the body, and it tends to tell them to stimulate to produce something which produces the hot flush. Possibly the hot flush is of a nitric oxide mediated vasodilation. We don't really know, but it's always there's a high level of prolactin. So the patient will weaken to prolactin, and this weakness is 9 times out of 10 negated by pyridoxal 5-phosphate. So people who have the polymorphism, that they're unable to activate pyridoxine into pyridoxal 5-phosphate, may also be the ones who have the difficult time in the menopause. So if we could only find out, a little bit more about these polymorphisms and the genes that they're all on, you can tell you a lot of the predictive future if you don't epigenetically deal with those chromosomes. But you can at the same time epigenetically say, this is the issue with this polymorphism, this person needs to take a little bit more pyridoxal 5-phosphate or zinc or magnesium. Agnus castaris or chasteberry is a very, very good herb for dealing with it. It's generally considered to be the best for dealing with hot flushes, menopausal symptoms, and it stimulates the luteinizing hormone, so it helps to look after the second part of the cycle better. Chasteberry. Fibroids, uterine conditions are usually affected by estrogens, but more commonly the estrogen derivatives, the metabolic breakdown substances of the three types of estrogens that we'll talk at length: estradiol, estrone and estriol. These are all hydroxylated first of all, and then they're methylated, and then they're conjugated, and each process makes them more water soluble to try and pass them out in the urine and through the liver. So the hydroxylation products are usually more the proliferative ones, which may lead towards malignancies. The methoxylated, in other words they've been methylated, in addition, tend to be the ones that produce the benign growths, of which fibroids tend to be the main ones. So fibroids are usually high levels of methoxyestradiol or methoxyestrone, particularly as we see the 4 position one or 16 are the ones that stimulate the growth. So here consider things which are involved really with the conjugation of these, in other words the bonding together in order to be able to pee them out through the urine and the bile. B5P, zinc, magnesium. Selenium, because of its role with glutathione, is the main conjugator, but then other people say no, it's sulfation, sulfur, and glucuronidation. So glucuronate acids are great bonders of hormones, and this is interesting because this is present in Jerusalem artichoke, is a very good source of glucuronic acid. And remember last module we talked about its role with inulin. So we tend to glutathione, we tend to sulfate, we tend to acetylate, and glucuronidation. Those are the 4 ways that we detoxify or conjugate methoxylated derivatives.